welcome back to another episode of More Than Kurosawa. And this week we're going to be looking at the Bhutanese film Lunana, A Yak in the Classroom, directed by Pawo Choyning Dorji. But if you guys are new to the series, what I do every single week is pick a different movie to discuss by a different Asian director to help us understand the wide world of Asian cinema, which is why we call the series More Than Kurosawa. For a lot of us, we know some basic Asian directors or maybe know their names, but haven't necessarily done a deep dive on their movies. So we know or have seen a couple of Akira Kurosawa movies or modern people like a Bong Joon-ho. But there's so many great Asian directors that for a lot of us may feel like homework to watch these movies or to understand these different types of filmmakers. But what we want to do every single week is pick at least one of their movies by a different filmmaker to highlight some interesting filmmakers and some interesting movies throughout Asian cinema. And you guys have been showing a lot of support for the videos, watching them of course, but liking them, commenting below. I always appreciate you guys leaving your comments, letting me know your thoughts on if you've seen the movie or if you're going to check it out. I always appreciate it because what we want to do here is create an awesome film-loving community. But how we've been sort of structuring these videos is the first half talking about why I chose that filmmaker to cover, talk about some of their other movies, their stylistic kind of traits, and why they're an interesting filmmaker. Or if you have seen this movie and you want to check out more, why I recommend them as a filmmaker. Then the second half of the video talking about the movie itself, why I chose that as a kind of good starting point for you if you haven't seen any of the filmmakers' work, but also why it's a signature movie within their career. So starting off with the first half here, the discussion of the filmmaker and why I wanted to cover Dorji. And it's because I wanted to cover another modern director. We've done a few in a row now where we were looking at historical directors, either directors who have passed or had their moments in the early 2000s or in the 90s. But when we're learning about the wide world of Asian cinema, it's not all historical. It's not all people who made movies in the past. There's also exciting young directors that, in this case, got a little bit of Oscar love early on in their career and deserve some love and analysis too. And I think myself and a lot of people knew this filmmaker because he's the director of the Yak movie in the kind of 21 Oscar season year. There's a little bit of a buzz of this movie potentially getting nominated for Best International Feature, but I still think on Oscar morning nominations, everyone was really surprised that it did get nominated. You can watch my live reactions. I have that here uploaded on the channel, and you can see kind of my shock and surprise at the nomination of the movie. And we see these surprise movies every year where maybe we haven't heard of them. It gets nominated international feature. I think documentary feature is another category that likes to show kind of surprises in terms of the movies that they nominate. But oftentimes, my approach to international cinema, and maybe yours as well, is just to watch movies from directors I've heard before or have really good buzz. And sometimes these kind of surprise nominations, I go, oh, that's weird, and then I move on. But with this video, what I wanted to do was to go back and go, that's right, yeah, I didn't actually check out that Yak movie. Let's check it out. Let's see if the Academy was right. His new movie came out just last year and competed for the Oscars, so there's a bit of a momentum, a situation happening here. So letting me check out an interesting young new filmmaker from a country whose films I haven't really seen a lot, in this case Bhutan. And I was very surprised and at how much I enjoyed the movies, and it inspired me to ultimately create this video because I wanted to look at this type of a filmmaker who maybe gets pushed to the side because they're not a big name, because they've only made a couple of movies from a country we've never heard of. It's easy to write it off, but that's the whole purpose of this series, is to take our time and look at all these different filmmakers and give them the respect that they deserve. And despite only making 2 films, I think we're really starting to see Dorji grow as a filmmaker. He already is a filmmaker with, I think, a kind soul and a naturalistic visual sense. His first film, Lunana, A Yak in the Classroom, has a very traditional story structure in that fish out of water structure, but it is still expertly told, and I don't think it's a coincidence that it was nominated in the same year that Coda won Best Picture, because they're both similar films in that they're unabashedly sentimental and are kind of about music, building community. And that it's a very sort of traditional movie, his first movie, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later. But then we see a second movie which just came out last year, The Monk and the Gun, which is, I think, more complex. It's more political. It's not so centered on 2 or 3 characters. It's much more of an ensemble. It's, I think, a little funnier, but a little bit more of a satire, too. So we're already seeing, Dorji evolve as a filmmaker, which is interesting and exciting to me. But what kind of stays the same? What makes him unique, at least within these first 2 films? And I mentioned, I think he has that naturalistic visual sense, shoots outside a lot, uses natural light. And his movies aren't art house movies in a way. They are kind of Western and traditional, and their story structure is still very entertaining. But what he is unique at is sometimes you'll have odd editing patterns in that he'll frequently, cut to a close-up of a person who's not talking in a conversation, or he'll cut to a wide shot outside of a building, somewhat sporadically. And what that does, I think, gives us a real sense of the characters and the place. I think he has a real kind of humanistic bend to him, so that when he's having a conversation, I think he just feels naturally compelled to have these really tight close-ups where we can see the wrinkles on someone's face or their expressions, and leans in on the actors. I think he has a keen sense of the power of faces, of how impactful a close-up can be in conjunction with that kind of natural light. There is a beauty to the way he shoots things with that still or somewhat handheld camera. A lot of his frames are still, though. So whether it be kind of the connection between people and their close-ups of their faces, or just the wide shots of, landscapes of Bhutan, I think he has a real love for his characters. And because he kind of sporadically throws in these tight close-ups in the middle of conversations, it gives us a deeper sense of the people we're kind of with and the place we're in. So it does feel kind of immersive in that way. If I were to compare him to an American or well-known filmmaker, I would do like maybe a Jonathan Demme or even an Ang Lee. I think both of those filmmakers have a similar humanistic side to them, where they love a close-up and kind of the intimacy and innocence between some of their characters. But more so Demme too, because we're starting to see Dorji have maybe more political interest in him as well, where Demme could do a very humanistic movie like Philadelphia, but also, interlace it with some political elements. Of course, he also made The Manchurian Candidate, and I think with Dorji, The Monk and the Gun being a little bit more political, or have more on its mind than just a sweet, innocent movie, is akin to a filmmaker like Demme, who can be both humanist but also political. But I still see that kind of Ang Lee gentleness and innocence to a lot of his movies too. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out a couple of his films. And already, even though he's made only a couple of his movies, I think we're starting to see a style and a real exciting young filmmaker in Pawo explore himself, and I can't wait to see what his next movie is. But transitioning over into my discussion of the film we're talking about today is Lunana, a Yak in the Classroom, about a teacher who wants to move to Australia to become a singer, but he's still under contract to be a teacher and has got kind of 1 semester left. And they sort of assign him to one of the most remote schools in the world, in Lunana, where he has to trek for days just to get to the village. A village that's very remote, that is far from the city and doesn't have really any schooling and toilet paper and power or electricity. It's very remote. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a traditional kind of fish out of water structure. So there is some humor to be mined within the kind of differences. Of course, we are kind of connected to the teacher. Ugden Dorji is the character's name. And as we kind of learn more, we kind of are put in his shoes and are surprised by the simplicity of a village like Lunana, which, like I mentioned, does mine some humor to it. But what I think is special about the movie is that Dorji, his approach to the movie, really siding with the people of Lunana. That this could easily be, a city versus country kind of a comedy where we make fun of the country people. But it actually reminded me a lot of a movie like Hunt for Red October, where if you've seen that movie, the submarine John McTiernan movie with Sean Connery and Alec Baldwin, there's a strong point of view from the Americans, but also a strong point of view from the Russians. And there is a kind of balance. There's no bad guys versus good guys. It's just two sides. And I think similarly here with Lunana, Dorji, if anything, sides with the country people, the village people of Lunana, and their simplistic ways and their kind of approach to the world. So yes, there is some humor that minds in the movie, but quickly we start to realize that it's more so a kind of clash of values and morals and how they see the world, and it's not, that makes it seem maybe more of an intense political movie, but it is a movie with different perspectives and allows both perspectives to breathe, and as they kind of merge together and see each other's sides, I think it turns into a really kind of sweet, beautiful movie. In particular, the way we learn more about the kind of respect and kindness of a place like Lunana as depicted in the movie. And while I think Dorji is a very talented filmmaker, there is one thing that I haven't really been talking about too much, which is Bhutan and the idea of kind of cultural tourism. That for a lot of us, both East and West, we haven't seen any movies shot in Bhutan. They didn't get the internet until 2006. Many of them didn't even grow up, watching TV. There was a very new country in that sense. They have very poor infrastructure, not a lot of roads, things like that. So when we're watching these Bhutanese movies, for many of us, including myself, it's the only Bhutanese movies we've ever seen. Lunana, A Yak in the Classroom got nominated for the Oscars. It was only the second time the country ever submitted a movie to the Academy to be reviewed. So it's still a very young film industry in that sense. And as a result, so much of my joy of the movie, and I think other people's joy of the movie, is just seeing a really unique culture that we've never seen before. And there's an element of that with international cinema too, where it can seem at points maybe voyeuristic, but I think when you have a filmmaker like Dorji, who's from Bhutan, who in part grew up there during his childhood, grew up in a lot of places, but definitely grew up in summers and things like that in the country. There's just a base intrigue in seeing a new country that you've never seen before, in a community you've never seen before, told by someone from the community. Now, it's great that he also has I think a fantastic visual sense, and he's a talented filmmaker, but even if he just shot this movie the way it's shot, that would be enough. Because I'm just so unfamiliar with the country, that I will admit part of my enjoyment to the movie is that kind of cultural tourism, is just seeing these people and how they live, and I'm interested in that. And I think a lot of people within the Academy are interested in that as well. And I know sometimes with international features that can feel, in a way, exploitative, because you're just interested in seeing a new country and being voyeuristic, like I mentioned. But I do think that this movie transcends that. But we also should admit that a large part of the enjoyment, at least for me, is just learning more about the country and its culture and seeing the beautiful vistas. It really is a beautiful country and a beautiful country to photograph. So while we've had Japanese movies for, almost or over 100 years, we haven't had Bhutanese movies. So when you have a really talented filmmaker like Pawo making movies in a country that you haven't seen too much about, it really is a great combination and a prime example that when it comes to Asian cinema, there is more than Kurosawa. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't seen Lunana, definitely check it out. It's on Netflix in Canada and the United States, so it's easy to watch, and I think is an easy to enjoy movie. And you get to learn a little bit more about a culture that maybe you don't know too much about. I didn't know too much about it myself going into these movies, but I was happily surprised to how much I enjoyed the movies, and I think you would be too. But that's about it. If you want, comment below. Let me know if you've seen the movie or seen any of Pawo's other movies. But that's about it. Until next week, stay tuned.